process of cellular respiration from pages 258 to 260 in your textbook. Our objectives. We're going to explain how high energy electrons are used by the electron transport chain and identify how much ATP cellular respiration generates. So on the previous video, the glycolysis or the first two stages of a cellular respiration, which are glycolysis and Krebs cycle, have been already mentioned and explained. So we're now going to move on to the third stage of cellular respiration, which is electron transport chain. So how does electron transport chain use high energy electrons from glycolysis and Krebs cycle? The electron transport chain uses the high energy electrons, of course, from glycolysis and the Krebs cycle to convert ADP into ATP. As what we know, ATP are energy carriers of the cell. Another are the NADH and FADH2, which pass their high energy electrons to electron carrier proteins in the electron transport chain. These are all coming from Krebs cycle. At the end of the electron transport chain, the electrons combine with hydrogen ions and oxygen to form water. So in this process, water is being produced aside from the energy. So if you're going to look at the arrow or the yellow line in which the NAD is being converted into this, or the hydrogens from this NADH plus the oxygen and electrons have been converted into water. If you're going to look at the figure. So this is the end product, which is water. The energy generated by the electron transport chain is used to move hydrogen ions against a concentration gradient across the inner mitochondrial membrane and into the intermembrane spaces. So if you're going to look at the figure here, if you're going to follow the marker or the cursor or the pointer rather, here you have these molecules here which are of numbered or a greater number. These are the hydrogen molecules, and usually of course some of them are moving into the membrane or inner mitochondrial membrane using the ATP synthase. If you're going to look at this, which with the use also of hydrogen, with the use of energy. So some of the energies here that are generated are used to move hydrogen ions against, mean to say, from lower concentration, which are inside the mitochondria, going out of the mitochondria or going into the mitochondrial membrane, in which there is greater concentration of hydrogen. So these hydrogen ions pass back across the mitochondrial membrane through the ATP synthase, is what I've told you here, causing the ATP synthase molecule to spin. This is also true during the photosynthesis process, if you still remember in your grade 9 lesson. So with each rotation, the ATP synthase attaches a phosphate to ADP to produce ATP. So that's it for the whole process of the cell respiration. Now let's move on to how much energy does cell respiration generate. So together, glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain release about 36 molecules of ATP per molecule of glucose. So again, in the process of oxygen, The complete breakdown of glucose through cell respiration results in the production of 36 ATP molecules. If you're going to look at the figure, in the electron transport chain, there are 32 ATPs which have been produced along with water. And then for Krebs cycle, we have 2 along with carbon dioxide, and glycolysis, which also has a net gain of 2 ATP. So this represents about 36% of the total energy of glucose. The remaining 64% is released as heat. The cell can generate ATP from about any source actually, even though we have modeled it into using only glucose. Complex carbohydrates are broken down into simple sugars like glucose. Lipids and proteins can be broken down into molecules that enter the Krebs cycle or glycolysis at one of several places. So that's it for the cellular respiration. So let us now summarize the electron transport chain and ATP synthase. The electron transport chain uses the high-energy electrons from the glycolysis and the Krebs cycle to convert ADP into ATP. The electron carriers produced during glycolysis and Krebs cycle bring high-energy electrons to the electron transport chain. Oxygen is the final electron acceptor. The passing of electrons through the electron transport chain causes hydrogen ions to build up in the intermembrane space, making it positively charged relative to the matrix. The charge difference across the membrane forces hydrogen ions through channels in enzymes known as ATP synthases. As the ATP synthases spin, a phosphate group is added to ADP generating ATP. The total number of ATP from glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and electron transport chain are about 36 molecules of ATP per molecule of glucose. So let's have some lesson check questions. Number 1. How does the electron transport chain use the high energy electrons from glycolysis and Krebs cycle? So the answer is, of course, to power the pumping of ion or hydrogen ions against a concentration gradient from the matrix to the intermembrane space. Number 2 question. How does a cell use the charge differences that build up across the inner mitochondrial membrane during cellular respiration? The answer is the charge differences force protons through ATP synthase, which powers the conversion of ADP into ATP. So number 3 question, how many molecules of ATP are produced in the entire breakdown of glucose? So of course, there are about 36 molecules of ATP per molecule of glucose. So that's it. That's it, girls. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day.